Kung Fu Panda is a absolute masterpiece of a movie trilogy, especially for like an animated one. It has 3 amazing movies under its belt that stick out in their own unique ways, all with fantastic 10 out of 10 villains, some of the best in any animated film ever. Shen is one of my favorites of all time. It's a real shame that they never made a Kung Fu Panda 4. That would have surpassed everybody's expectations. However, the movies are easy talk and are not going to be the discussion of today. Rather, I want to go back and take a look at the surprisingly ambitious movie tie-in game for the first Kung Fu Panda film. Releasing on June 3rd, 2008 in North America, 3 days before the movie, the Kung Fu Panda video game would be available on every relevant system of its time. The Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3, the Nintendo Wii, DS, and even the PS2, which, I mean, to be fair, has far more strange late ports, if I'm being honest. Despite being made by different developers on each ports, they all are pretty similar overall, but I'm gonna be looking at the Xbox 360 version, as honestly, it's the best version, and is developed by Luxoflux, who are responsible for some insane masterpieces, such as Vigilante 8, Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, and Shrek 2. Well, at least that's one I own. Now onto the game itself. If there's anything to be said about it, it's gotta be the presentation is just wow. Absolutely mind-blowing. This is a movie tie-in game that came out in 2008, and it looks like it could have been a big budget title of its time, as other movie tie-in games releasing around the same year look like trash compared to this. The environments, the lighting, the water, all look amazing here. The only thing that's a little bit off would probably be the character models at some points, which can look unsettling at times, let's just say that. But aside from that, this is a very beautiful game. Up until when it came out, this is probably the most beautiful movie tie-in game, presentation-wise. Though, you already know graphics mean nothing if the game is absolute dog shit. So what is this game really? Well, the story follows pretty much the same plot of the movie, though only 20% of the game is canon, whereas the other 80% is filler, and even introduces villains or interactions that were never in the movie. Anyone remember the Wu sisters? Yeah, me neither. Which, I'm gonna be honest, is a welcome addition, as despite its name, Kung Fu Panda was far more story-driven, if anything. Action scenes being saved for very powerful moments, which honestly was one of the best things about the movie. Therefore, following this game's canon to a T would definitely make this game play more like a Telltale game. As you would probably guess, like most movie license games of its time, this is an action platformer. And I'm gonna be honest, a pretty polished and satisfying one at that. I've already went over how the graphics look very good, the environments being very nice to look at, especially for 2008 standards, but the gameplay itself feels good, and they actually capture the feeling of the characters surprisingly well. For example, Po feels very weighted, though not tanky, and just flexible enough for platforming to not be clunky, which is very in character for Po if you've ever seen the movie, you know what I mean? Then characters like Tigress or Shifu feel far more light and agile, but in compensation they get knocked around by enemies easier. This game offers a lot of variety in its gameplay too. It mainly consists of going straight and beating up enemies with a diverse enough combat system to make fighting feel fun and engaging, which is surprising honestly, but it also adds new gameplay styles like playing as Crane and flying, Sonic spin dashing all over the place, or my least favorite, protecting treasures. Not all these missions are fun, I'm gonna be honest. As I just mentioned, there's this one mission where you have to protect the temple's treasures from enemies, but this goes on for like 20 minutes. There's about 12 waves of this, and it just drags on, honestly. And I wasn't a big fan of the pond levels, as falling off the lily pads is not a very hard thing to do, and it results in an instant death, but it's not really the end of the world or anything, as this game isn't that hard. Now, something I really disliked about this game was the boss fights. There's only like 2 of them, but I didn't like them. I didn't like any of them. This game's combat is pretty fun enough and works well with smaller enemies and hordes, but when you got these attack-sponging enemies that take no knockback at all, like Tai Lung for example, these boss fights end up boiling down to being mindless, clunky, and honestly just pretty dragged on. And since this game came out in the big year of 2008, you already know there's a ton of quick time events, which is only a thing of its time, honestly. Which I usually don't mind. I especially loved QuickTime events in games like Sonic Unleashed or Ashura's Wrath. But here, like in most games, they're just alright. They don't feel engaging or even satisfying to pull off at all. I really hate to insult this game, but they are almost as bad as those QuickTime events from the Spider-Man 3 game, which are in a realm of their own, if we're being honest. But hey, I do not want to end up talking about the Tai Lung fight in a bad light, as despite being, honestly, a pretty bad boss fight, I didn't care. It made me feel like I was playing through the movie, and you know what? That's good enough, honestly. That's the goal here, right? I mean, the cutscenes during the fight looked absolutely stunning, and he even gets defeated in the same way as in the movie. And on a side note, they actually went out of their way to show Poe learning this move, which they didn't do directly in the movie, they only ever mentioned it. But with that all said, this game is very short. I beat it in just over 3 hours, which is insane, but honestly a fair length for a game like this, considering they have to drag it out with extra fluff that wasn't in the movie. And I mean that with no disrespect. But if you crave more after beating this honestly solid experience, the replay value ain't too bad. Throughout the stages, there's like collectibles, statues, and extra objectives you can do, which aren't that bad to get, and add replayability to the stages while rewarding you with bonus content like concept art, or a Madagascar 2 trailer. What the fuck? And then there's also bonus content unlockable for the multiplayer mode, which I didn't really get into. I didn't play much of that, but I did find out you can use non-playable characters like Tai Lung, which was super cool. I've always wanted Tai Lung in a good video game, so this is like a dream come true. Aside from all that, there's not much else to talk about with this game, as it's a very short movie tie-in game, as expected, but I'm all for it. It's short but sweet. Any longer, and I'd argue this game would just be a drag. I feel like it's packed with enough content and replay value for its worth. Despite the title of this video, I wouldn't genuinely call this game like a masterpiece in the realm of games as a whole, as it does have its issues. Its pacing is completely off, the story is worse than the movies, its boss fights can actually be pretty atrocious, some QuickTime event sequences do not feel good at all, but on the other hand, as far as movie tie-in games go, I would definitely declare this game a masterpiece. Absolutely. This is one of the best of all times, as its visuals and graphics are rich, it controls very good, the gameplay complements the characters it's based on, which you don't see a lot. Despite not being as good as the movie when it comes to story, it's still faithful and at least tries to add some interesting new stuff that do admittedly land sometimes. And the gameplay itself, besides a couple hiccups, flows nicely and is perfectly length with fun replay value, and even some difficulty options if you feel it's too easy or hard. This is a perfectly balanced experience, and honestly far surpassed my expectations. I came into this knowing it was going to be a pretty good game, as I played a little bit of it as a kid, but I didn't expect this to be a solid video game. Like, Jesus Christ. This is definitely one of the best movie tie-in games I've ever played, which is a very strong statement, as I've played a ton of them. Despite what you may think, this is definitely up there with other great movie games like Spider-Man 2 the video game, or the Toy Story video game trilogy. Since this game seriously surpassed my expectations, I really look forward to see what the other 2 Kung Fu Panda movie games have to offer. Who knows, they could be just as good, if not better. All I will say is that I hope they don't have to share the same box art with Lego Indiana Jones again. This pissed me off as a kid and it pisses me off now. Just say you can't afford Lego Batman and move on.